Hey man, it's tough out there, particularly if you're in crimson and white. This might be the worst week ever at Alabama, and I do not think that's hyperbole. Dean Leggy, Matt DeBerry, Ryan Curley. Some of us have been around long enough before Nick Saban was the head coach at Alabama, but this past 7 days he's retired. Uh, I think you can make the argument that outside of Bear Bryant's passing in 1982, Matt, that this has been a really bad week for Alabama. Let's recap, shall we?
Yeah, they're just losing players left and right. Caleb Downs, one of the best defensive backs in college football, is in the portal. Caden Proctor, their star freshman left tackle, who has top 10 pick written all over him, is in the portal. I think they lost a running back, Roydell Williams, to Florida State. I think Florida State's actually, landed 6 or 7 former Alabama players now. Isaiah Bond, their best receiver, is off to Texas. Is Jalen Milroe the only player that's not entered the portal at this point? I mean, this is getting wild. And I knew that some guys would enter the portal when Nick Saban left because this is not the same Alabama. These kids who are currently on the roster, all growing up, Alabama was connected to Nick Saban. They don't have any memory of Alabama before this. So with Nick Saban gone, the aura of Alabama just isn't there. This is not the same Alabama. And these players are jumping ship. And a lot of it is, for playing time elsewhere. They want to play for a different coach, obviously. Some of it's NIL. But Ryan, this is not a great look. And for the number one program of all time, we just haven't seen anything like this since, what Dean said about Bear Bryant. But I mean, they lost to the Warhawks, right, Dean? UL Monroe back in 2006. This is a pretty bad week, though.
Are you surprised? I'm not really surprised that this is the fallout of the GOAT leaving Alabama. I mean, that's a big draw for why people go there. Obviously, part of it's the brand, part of it is a chance to make the league, a chance to win championships, but a lot of that was predicated on Nick Saban being there. I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. He wins everywhere he goes. It's TBD on how he's going to do at Alabama, and the first season isn't necessarily going to be the only indicator for how it might be over a 2, 3, 4, however long it ends up being there. But for this season, immediately coming up in 2024, it is starting to look a little darker and a little darker. Just as each, it's not just that they're losing players; they're losing high level players. Like Matt said, future first round picks, right? I mean, Caleb Downs, future first round pick. Caden Proctor, future first round pick. Isaiah Bond, potential future first round pick. He's definitely an NFL wide receiver. So I'm not really shocked, just because I think that it was to be expected that at least a handful of those players were going to exercise the option to leave. When you're committing to a program, you're committing to a coach too, and obviously, this is the fallout.
Yeah, I want people to remember that in 2005, Alabama's capacity was about 84,000 people in Bryant Denny. Now, one thing that happened in the context of that is Alabama played a lot of games in Birmingham. Over time, that stopped, thankfully for everyone involved. Since Nick Saban has been head coach at Alabama, Alabama's almost increased their capacity at their stadium by 20,000. It predates him slightly, but that's one thing to consider. Another thing is that if you look at the years before Nick was there, train wrecks. Now, Kalen DeBoer, I think, has proven that he can get it done, but there was a notion that Dennis Franchione would be really good there, and he left to go to be the coach at Texas A&M, where he was mediocre like everybody else. This is just coming back down to reality, Matt. I mean, this is crashing harder than I thought it would. I'll be honest. I didn't think it would be like this, and I think DeBoer's got to be taking some responsibility for that. He's not doing a good job right now of keeping guys in the program. I mean, he just isn't. But the reality is, to me, this is a program that saw 7 games in Tuscaloosa over in Nick's time there. 7 games in almost 15 years or whatever it's been. That's a long, 17 years, right? Yeah. They lost 7 games in 17 years now at Tuscaloosa. They very well could lose the first game that they play there in 2024, which is the Georgia game. I do not think they'll lose to Wisconsin. I do not think that's out of the question if things don't settle down.
Yeah, he's not great at retaining some of his best coaches either on the staff, including Travaris Robinson, who was an ace recruiter. I mean, that was a big deal, Georgia going out and getting that guy, which could lead to Caleb Downs coming down too. So, yeah, I mean, the power of that Crimson A does go a long way. But when you have a guy like Nick Saban who was there for so long, he kind of embodies the program, and the two go hand in hand, especially for some of these young kids. And my first reaction to that hire was he is a good coach. I mean, I think 104-12 is 104-12, but he has no footprint in the SEC. And with all these guys leaving, he needs to rebuild this thing quickly. He needs to understand and get to know these high school coaches in Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Florida. He's got to get that going. And I thought he would bring in some coaches, Ryan, who have a footprint in the SEC, have experience coaching in the SEC. It's a different ball game, as we all know. It's a different world, especially from the Pac-12. And as good a coach as he is, he's got to turn into a really good recruiter, because having a good coach is going to win you a lot of games. But having the best players is how you win championships.
He's
And it's
not
going to
recruiting.
take him some time.
He's not effectively recruiting, Matt. I just want to say this real quick, and I'll let you ramble on.
Right? Yeah.
Kurt, it was a different time. It was a different time. I will admit that. The guys can just leave now. They couldn't in 2016. And I'll throw it back to Matt. But the return of Roquan, Sony, Davin, Nick, Lorenzo Carter, etc. I think those were the five guys in the press conference. That changed Kirby's program.
Yeah, and it's a big reason why I think Ohio State could have a really good year. They have a lot of guys returning, but Georgia's the same way. When they have great seasons, which is almost every year, you can always count on a few of those guys coming back. And when there's such a mass exodus like this, I don't even know if I said that properly, but it's not good. I'm glad. That's awesome. But he might be in a little bit of trouble here getting this program back to where they are competing, Ryan, for championships every single year. They haven't won it in 3 years. Nick Saban's gone. He's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and things weren't amazing, right? Right before Nick Saban got to Alabama, it wasn't their best stretch of football. It's not impossible that it starts fading back to that until they get the right guy there. If it's not Kalen DeBoer, obviously, he brought some coaches with him from Washington, not able to bring any real impact players from there because, one, he wasn't there for a long time, so he didn't build that much of an infrastructure at Washington. Two, a lot of his best players are transfers, are going to the league now, so there wasn't a lot that he could really bring with him from up there. But it is part of the recruiting. When you get there, you've got to convince. It's a different world. You've got to convince those guys to stay, because these kids have offers, whether it's legal or not. They already have options before these windows open or don't. I think in a way, he got a little bit of a raw deal in the turnaround between. Obviously, I don't know what was talked about before Nick Saban's retiring, before he makes an announcement. I don't know where the Alabama athletic department was, if they knew it was 100% that he was going or not. But
no,
he's going there after the trend. Right now,
I mean, clearly.
Exactly. So then they turn around, they try to get in a 72-hour period, they try to get a new guy. They end up, in a way, it seems like they settled for DeBoer. It's not seems like they did. They did settle, right? Because they obviously at least talked to or inquired with some other coaches first. But for in Kalen DeBoer's defense, I guess if I'm going to go devil's advocate, he's not jumping into a situation where he's even in the real transfer portal window, right? Like a month ago, when he's got a chance to recruit and maybe bring in some other guys. He's getting a deal where he's fighting to keep the Alabama players, and there aren't as many. Most of the really good transfer players already picked their destination before he even got a chance to recruit them.
See, I think you're okay. So I think the way you phrased it there is incorrect, and I'll put it to you like this: so let's just say you're going to a casino, and you have the ability to start with 100 G's or about $10,000. Wouldn't you rather start with 100 G's? This guy started with 100 G's. He's not kept 100 G's. And maybe they should be spending 100 G's. I mean, we're talking about Matt DeBerry money here, right? So, well, it'd probably be more than that. But they had the ability, Ryan, to keep those guys. They didn't do it. This is the failure, if you want to call it that, so far, is there's too many guys leaving. I mean, it's just what coaches leave. But It took Nick. If we're being completely fair, it wasn't just a 2-year turnaround for Nick. Alabama became quote Alabama in 11, 12. And I mean, yes, 9 mattered a lot, but they were 10-3 in 2010, I think it was, something like that, or 10-2. They didn't play in the conference. They lost to Auburn. When Nick really was punishing people was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That was the run right there. And that took him about 4 years to get right. And that, I mean, is Caleb DeBoer going to do that? Is he going to have a national championship to lever his situation, Matt, to get to 4 years later?
I'd like.
I mean, we're talking about Sarkisian's at Texas. We're talking about Sarkisian at Texas. Kirby. Yeah. One thing that people constantly say to me, y'all, is that, yeah, Nick is awesome. He's the greatest of all time. He is not building it while Kirby was at Georgia. Kirby did do that with Nick there.
Yeah. And, we named a few of the bigger players who have left, but I think it's more than people think. Antonio Kite is a safety that I was really high on in high school. He's an Alabama kid. He left. The great Jake Pope, right, transferred to Georgia. Seth McLaughlin snapping the ball all over the place in the Rose Bowl. He's gone. But I think maybe 2 running backs. I know Roydell Williams, I guess, is at Florida State, but it's a lot more than I think people realize. And that's going to make things tougher for DeBoer. And he needs to have a big 2025 class. And I know, Dean, you mentioned earlier, he's not recruiting. He didn't recruit well at Washington. He'll have more resources at Alabama, but it's a completely different landscape. So he's got so much more work to do. And he didn't recruit Michael Penix Jr. out of high school either. So he's going to have to use that transfer portal. That needs to be his best friend, especially early on. How long was he at Washington? 2-3 years?
2 full years at Washington.
2 full years. Alabama's a different ball game. You're playing, especially with this schedule coming up, and Texas and Oklahoma coming in, it's going to make things even tougher. It might take him a little bit longer than I think Alabama fans would like for him to get this train really rolling. But it's not as easy of a job as people realize, especially when you've got guys jumping ship left and right like this. So it is going to be tough.
Well, it's just so many important pieces. I mean, this was their infrastructure for the coming season. It's just kind of gone. I mean, who's the most important player that they've kept so far is Jalen Milroe. And I think we all know how we feel about him. So I just don't see – I don't know if they're going to win 10 games in this first year.
They are listed as underdogs, Ryan, in the only 2 games that I can get lines on right now. They are listed as underdogs. They were listed
Georgia
as
and who?
And LSU. One of those is a home game, one is a road. They were a favorite over Georgia before Nick. That game has shifted almost 5 points.
Yeah, I like LSU. I'll go ahead and say that. I think they're going to be all right this year. So go ahead, Ryan. Didn't mean to cut you off there.
Well, I mean, I think when you look ahead, I mean, Alabama, they could slip to the 4th, 5th, 6th best team in the conference this year. And maybe whether that's a 1 year out or if that starts becoming the norm during this next era for them. But it's
Well, hold on. I mean, who you got in front of them? I mean, Georgia, sure, but what else?
Georgia, Texas, LSU, Missouri, Ole Miss. Are you telling me those teams don't look better than Alabama right now heading into next season? Because I do.
I don't want to get too excited about Missouri. All due respect to Middle Earth, but they've got to play Georgia. They got to go to Tennessee. They should handle Tennessee. They host Missouri. And then, some of these games suddenly, Ryan, they don't look as easy as they once did when half your team is checking out. And they can't really replace them, the guys.
No, I mean, you have to hope that the younger guys, or whether they're younger or not, but you have to hope that some of those second-string guys are ready to roll. I mean, now it's about building what you have there because there will be some spring transfers, right? There'll be a few guys who lose jobs in the spring and they transfer. And he's going to have to hit that hard. But like Matt was saying earlier, if he wants to get this thing rolling, obviously he's not equipped or is equipping his staff with people that really know the South, that have a lot of ties with the South. He's going out and getting head coaches from Buffalo and things like that. I don't know the background on that guy or anything, but I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, Ryan. And Ryan, I want to get both of y'all's take on this. Ryan first. I don't want to overreact. I really don't. But is it possible you can smell the Brian Harsin here? Is that too? Or I mean, I think that's an overreaction. But
That's an
comments.
overreaction. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an overreaction. That was really weird. Weird's the way to put
This
like what
isn't
happened
getting
with
off to
Brian
a
Harsin.
great start.
It's not. What did you think about his speech last night at the basketball game? Did you see him? It just didn't seem.
I just watched Nate Oates shove a player, which was completely unacceptable. I would have started a fight when I was playing. I'm surprised it kind of didn't. I didn't think it. I did not hear it. I had it on mute.
Yeah. I think he's going to recruit at least harder than Brian Harsin did and care a little more. And I think he's a better coach than Brian Harsin. But
Yes.
I get the similarities of where they're coming from, coming down to the South and trying to take over a program that people really care about. This is an incredibly big and passionate fan base that's not used to losing. And they might lose a few games this year.
It's not been a great week for Alabama, and we're not predicting that the thing just slips off into Never Land. But this has just not been a good week for Alabama. Your head coach is retiring. The guy that has won more, he's the greatest coach of all time, is retiring. And now you're seeing a roster exodus, the likes of which I've not seen. It's like biblical proportions. So well, let's just see how this plays out. But it's not been a good week for the Tide. Thanks for watching.